Welcome to Washington Watch with Congressman Walter Jones. Each month, we take a look at the events happening in Washington, D.C. and how they affect our lives here in eastern North Carolina.
Beautiful little horse. It is God's gift to the world. So thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you for...
And now, here's your Congressman, Walter Jones.
Welcome to Washington Watch. Today's guest is a young man that I have the utmost respect for. His name is John Sarbanes. He is in his fourth term. He represents the 3rd Congressional District in Maryland. John Sarbanes is a graduate of Princeton University and also Harvard Law School. He practiced law for 18 years before he became a member of Congress. He is married with 3 children. John and I became friends a year ago because of a bill that he introduced that we're going to talk a little bit more about, because I want you, the people of the 3rd District, to understand that with all this money that is spent during campaigns, there is another alternative, and we're getting to that in just a moment. But first, I would like to remind you that when I ran in 1994, an average cost to run for the United States House of Representatives was slightly over $800,000. In 2012, that figure is well over $1.59 million. So it's doubled, quite frankly, in the 18 years that I've been in office. John Sarbanes, I want to thank you for being on Washington Watch, and I want you to share with the people of the 3rd District that there is an option, and your bill that you introduced last year and will in the new Congress is called Government by the People. If you'll share some of the details, then we get into a conversation.
Sure. Well, first of all, Walter, let me thank you for the opportunity to come on Washington Watch. I think this is a great service to the constituents you have in the 3rd District in North Carolina. I represent the 3rd District too, but my district is in Maryland. And this kind of opportunity for the public to get kind of a first-hand report on things that are going on in Washington, I think is absolutely critical. So I commend you for this resource that you provide to your district. And I appreciate your support and interest of the kind of reform that we've put forward with the Government by the People Act, which, as you say, we introduced last year. This came about, Walter, because you and I think others have perceived that many, many Americans feel that their voices are not being heard here in Washington. They look at Washington, they look at Congress, they think that special interests and sort of big money interests are the ones that call the shots, and that the voices of everyday Americans, whether they be Republicans or Democrats or independents, are just not being heard, are not part of the mix. And what happens then is when you go to make policy in an institution like this, the result is you lean as an institution in the direction of the people that are funding campaigns, the people that are making those sizable contributions, and you end up, unfortunately, leaning away from what the public would like to see as a matter of public policy. So our challenge is to figure out a way to give people their voice back, to make them relevant again to the powering of campaigns. And so the Government by the People Act is premised on that challenge. And the idea was, can we create a different place where members of Congress and candidates who may want to come to Congress can turn to raise the dollars for their campaigns so they don't always have to go to the PACs and the big money crowd and the special interests. And I believe, and you've supported our proposal, and I thank you for that. So you clearly believe that we can set up a system that's driven by small donors, a small donor matching system that's publicly funded, so someone who gives a $25 or $50 contribution is consequential to a candidate. And if that donation is consequential, then members of Congress and candidates will begin to turn their attention to those small donors, to everyday citizens, and begin listening to them and not all the time just listening to the big money special interests. So that's why we introduced the Government by the People Act. And we can talk a little bit more about some of the design elements of it. But the basic idea was give government back to the people, make their voice the one that we listen to.
John, thank you for that brief summary, and I know we will get into aspects of the bill that may be used for an example. If I was a candidate, how would this affect me? But first, to the point, you know, in North Carolina, the Senate race between Kay Hagan, the sitting senator, and Tom Tillis, the Republican, was over $100 million. Mm-hmm. And people that I consider myself an average citizen, I was incensed that there would be so much money spent when I look at the people in my district and the average income, that I had individuals who are pretty successful to come to me and say, you know, I don't feel like I'm part of the process. And that's the point you just made just a moment ago. And then I think Citizens United, which your bill does not speak to the issue of Citizens United, let me make that clear right now, but that in itself created a third entity, the super PACs. So your bill to me is the best hope for a candidate who does not have access to the big money people. And also, as you said, to bring this back to the people. It is their government. It's not super PAC. It's not the super PACs in the government. And for me, your bill is, I think, the best hope to maintain a democracy in Washington, D.C., where it is the people's government, not special interests government. So,
well, Walter, one statistic I think which is just very alarming from the last election just a month ago was it was the lowest turnout across the country since 1942. People just stayed home. And, you know, there's probably a variety of reasons for why they stayed home, but among them, I think, is they say to themselves, the rational voter says, well, why would I go out and bother to vote for someone up there in Washington, for example, if I'm convinced that they're answering the call of big money and special interests and aren't listening to me? And so, unfortunately, this influence of the big money is, I think, depressing turnout because people just feel like their voice doesn't matter anymore. And in a sense, they almost stay home to maintain a shred of dignity in this process because if they go out and vote for someone who's going to turn around and just kowtow to the special interest, then it's sort of a humiliation for the average voter out there. That's why we have to bring them into the solution. And you're right. I feel the way you do. I think of myself as an average citizen. I look at Washington, and I think, what would make me feel more engaged? And when it comes to this money thing, it's the empowerment of knowing that my $25, my $50 donation is actually enough to get the attention of a candidate and to empower a candidate who's ready to reach out to people like me and not the candidates who, you know, will always turn to the deep-pocketed special interests. So let me describe a couple of the elements of the bill because I think they're important. The first thing we wanted to really make sure of was that people had the opportunity to participate. You know, our Supreme Court, I'm not sure I agree with them, but our Supreme Court has declared now that we live in a world where money is speech.
Right.
Well, if money is speech, then it begs the question, how do people of modest means have speech? And so we have to, I think, provide some support and assistance to get that everyday citizen into a place where their donation is possible. So what we did was we put into the bill a small tax credit, a refundable tax credit for small donations to campaigns, congressional campaigns. So the way it works is if you give $20 to a congressional candidate, you get $10 back. It's a 50% refundable tax credit. If you give 40, you get 20. All the way up to $50, you'll get $25 back in each of the 2 years of an election cycle. This makes it more possible for the average citizen out there, for whom a $10 or $20 donation to a political campaign is a heavy lift, well, make it a little bit easier for them so they can step up into this marketplace and participate. That was the first thing. The second part of our bill, and this is really critical, it says that a candidate who is able to recruit that small donor and agrees to do certain things like not take big PAC money and lower some of the high donations that they receive. So as long as the candidate shows they really are turning in the direction of those small donors, then that candidate can earn a 6-to-1 match of public funds for that small donation. So for example, somebody gives a $25 donation, the candidate earns another $150 match. So that $25 donation now has the value of $175. And it's consequential to the candidate. That's why the candidate now wants to come stand in your living room, if you're an average citizen, and talk to you, because you can collect from your neighbors enough dollars to make it really, matter to that candidate. The reason this is important is that's the incentive for the candidate to go find those small donors. Right now, candidates don't really have an incentive to search out and listen to everyday citizens, because you can't raise enough money that way to power the campaigns. You mentioned it now costs almost $1.6 million every 2 years to run a congressional campaign. Well, to raise that kind of money right now, the only place you can go is to the PACs and the big money crowd. If you had a small donor matching system where the $50 donor, the $25 donor can really help you, you'd turn there. I think many members, you would do it, I would do it, others would do it, and they'd be listening to a different group of people. They'd be listening to the public. So it's the small donor tax credit combined with the matching opportunity that I think creates the potential of this system. And then you mentioned super PACs. We have a provision as well that candidates who choose to participate in this system would get the benefit of maybe accessing some additional public funds in situations where there's a lot of outside spending coming at them. And so all of this, Walter, is about how you empower that average American, everyday citizen out there, who right now, let's face it, they're sitting at their kitchen table, the television's over in the corner, and all they hear every day is about how the big money people are taking over. And so after a while, you stop paying attention. You say, why should I go down into the public town square? Why should I participate in my democracy if my voice isn't going to count for anything? If we don't combat that cynicism, we'll never get our country back to where it needs to be.
John, if people watching this show are interested in your bill, would you give your website that they can go on your website and get more details about the bill?
Right. So my website is sarbanes.house.gov. That's my official website. That's where you can get information about the bill. But also, I would encourage people, if you just Google Government by the People Act, you will find your way to a number of different platforms out there that are describing the legislation and beginning to assemble, I think, a very powerful coalition across the country that wants to see this change. And I want to come back to something I said. So Government by the People Act. Google that. You will get where you need to be to learn more. But I want to come back to something I said at the outset, and that is what I find most compelling is when you go out and do a survey of the public about support for these kinds of changes that we're talking about. There is strong support across the political spectrum. Democrats, I think the support is in the 70s, but independents and Republicans, it's in the 60s. So, I mean, there's a universal feeling, regardless of what political stripe you are, that Washington is paying too much attention to Wall Street, this industry, whatever it might be, that has outsized influence, and isn't listening enough to everyday folks. I mean, I talk to small business people on Main Street, and they say, you know what, I think that Congress is paying more attention to what big business and Wall Street wants than what my little two-person, business cares about. And I think they're right about that.
I do too. I agree with you.
And if we don't find a way to bring the decent citizens of this country back into the public town square, and the metaphor that I like to use, Walter, is I think a lot of those people have fled the public town square because they feel like they have no role there, and because they've been shouted down by the big megaphone that special interests have. So they say, you know what, I don't belong here anymore, I'll just exit. But unfortunately, when that happens, more extreme elements rush into the vacuum it creates. And that's what everybody sees. And that kind of noise just fuels even further this sense of frustration and cynicism that people have. So we need to find a way to bring those people back into the public town square and get the benefit of their points of view, which right now we're missing.
You're right. And John, I want to pick up on the fact that you gave the percentages of Democrats and Republicans who are in favor of an alternative. And I know that I had spoken a few years ago, I think even before you came to Congress, I had spoken to Alan Simpson about this issue. He was leaving the Senate at the time. And Warren Rudman, who is now deceased, also a Republican, had been strong advocates of an alternative. And so I am going to personally, before the first of the year, I'm going to reach out to Alan Simpson and tell him and ask him to please give me names of Republicans within the House of Representatives that I can personally reach out to and say, look at this Sarbanes bill. Let's bring the government back to the people. And so I am just
I appreciate that.
Committed to doing this because of everything that you have said over the last few minutes. I have, in a different way, been saying the same thing down in eastern North Carolina. I listen to the people. You listen to the people of the 3rd District of Maryland. But when you really come down to it, they wonder how we make these decisions in Washington. Right. Because many times, as you said very well, the people say, well, how did you make that decision? It doesn't really benefit me.
They don't want those decisions made because somebody's whispering in your ear who was able to make some big donation to your campaign. They want the decision made based on what is good for public policy. And what's an interesting exercise, Walter, is you look at the floor statements given by retiring members of the Senate and the House over the last few years. Often within 24 hours of announcing their retirement, they will go to the floor and they will give a speech, and at some point during that speech, they will lament the influence that big money is having. It's almost as if once liberated from this system that has captured so many people, they're able to talk freely about it. You mentioned Republicans who care about this issue. I often cite a quote from Bob Dole from 1982. At that time, he was the Republican Senate Minority Leader in the U.S. Senate. And he said something, I'm paraphrasing, but he essentially said, if we ever get to where everyone has a PAC up here on Capitol Hill, we'll never get anything done. That was over 30 years ago. Well, we're now at a place where everyone has a PAC up here on Capitol Hill, and look around. We're not getting a whole lot done. So we need to reclaim the machinery of public policy that has been gummed up by all this money flowing into it. Give that back to the people. And you know, you and I may not agree on every issue. There may be an issue where we on the substance of it, we disagree completely, but we can agree that the voices of everyday citizens ought to be the ones that we listen to, wherever they may be on the political spectrum. That's all we're saying. Let's give our democracy, our government, our Congress back to the people that send us here so that we don't owe anything to the special interest. We do that, we may begin to win back some of that trust on the part of the American people, which right now is hanging by a thread.
It is, and John, I will honestly tell you that in the many years I've had the privilege to serve, if I could see a bill like your bill become the law of the land, or even have a debate on the floor of the House,
That would be something.
I feel like we would have accomplished a great deal. We only have about 40 seconds left. I want to thank you for your leadership and to assure you and the people of the 3rd District of North Carolina that you're a Democrat, I'm a Republican, but this is an example of how we should work together for the good of the people. This is the people's government, not the Republican government, not the Democratic government. It's the people's government. So, John, for you to be on this show, Washington Watch, for this month, I want to thank you for your leadership, and I give you my commitment that I will do everything to build interest on the Republican side, and thank you for joining us for this first segment of Washington Watch.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Welcome to the second part of Washington Watch. I'm delighted now to have my legislative director, Josh Bowling, who does a magnificent job for you, the people of the 3rd District. He tries to, along with other staff members, to analyze bills that will be coming to the floor that I have not had time to really study or read. And Josh is a graduate of UCLA and Duke Graduate School, so he brings a lot of credentials to this office, and he does a great job for the people of the 3rd District. Josh, thank you for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, sir. It's a pleasure to be here.
Josh, I see you brought me a present.
Merry Christmas, sir.
Well, thank you. Merry Christmas to the people of the 3rd District. I guess I can share this present with the people of the 3rd District?
Yes, sir, you can.
What is this package you brought me?
Well, sir, today is December 10th, and last night the House unveiled a 1,600-page omnibus bill that will fund the government for the rest of the fiscal year 2015 through September of next year. And it's over $1 trillion, so that's 1,600 pages and $1 trillion. And your previous guest spoke a lot about special interests, and no doubt that's full of a lot of special interest goodies.
Well, I assume that those of us in Congress will have 4 or 5 days to read this bill. I would hope it would take me at least 4 days to read this bill and to interpret some of what's in there, certainly not all, but some. How many days will the Congress have to read this before we vote on it?
Well, sir, I'd love to tell you that we had 4 or 5 days to read it, but unfortunately, it was filed late on a Tuesday night, and it looks like the House will be set to vote on it sometime at midday Thursday, so you'll have probably a little over 48 hours to plow through that if you just went right through it, but I doubt most folks will get that far.
I want to restate what Josh said when he came aboard, and that is that this is over 1,600 pages. We have gotten this bill. Can you imagine, if you can see the bill? I'm going to lift the bow for just a moment. There it is. Poor Uncle Sam and poor the taxpayers of America. Once we pass this bill, which I will not vote for it, by the way, but once this bill is passed, then over the next 10 days, we start deciphering what is in this bill. There will be some shell shock around this country, I'm sure. There
will be. There always is. And just from going over it to the extent that we have already, we know that, like unfortunately we've seen so many times in the past, it ships a lot of money overseas and cuts some things that are very important to the 3rd District, like funding for military construction at some of our bases while we were busy constructing projects and foreign aid overseas. So more of the same on that front.
Well, Josh, I did not vote for the National Defense Authorization Act that came over from the Senate because thanks to you and other staff members, we were able to find out that many of our active duty military at certain ranks were going to lose money. And then we saw where the retirees were going to have an increase in their health care system, and yet we increased the money going to Afghanistan. I don't think the people of America, and certainly I'm concerned about Eastern North Carolina, the 3rd District, can be very happy with the fact that we can find the money to build roads in Afghanistan, but we can't build roads in Eastern North Carolina. We can't fix bridges in Eastern North Carolina and across this nation. So you're saying in this 1,600 pages that there's more money going overseas, and in some programs in America they're being reduced back. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, sir. Over $1 trillion, as I mentioned before, over $70 billion on top of that to fund the wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the new war in Syria, $5 billion on top of that for Ebola. And I think it's important to point out this is all happening at a time when America is running annual federal budget deficits of nearly $500 billion a year. So that means half of this bill is deficit finance, meaning we're going to the Chinese, to the Russians, to other foreigners, and asking for them to loan us money so we can fund the things in here, a lot of which is just going back overseas in the form of roads projects and transportation projects and military endeavors overseas.
Well, I'm going to remind the people watching this show that in 2000, when Bill Clinton left office, we were roughly $5.6 trillion in debt. Today it's well over $17.8 trillion. I don't know what this will do to $17.8 trillion, but it will add to the debt of this nation. This is why, and I want to thank Josh, you know, yesterday before we did this taping that we got a lot of calls from the people of Eastern North Carolina upset about this bill and asking us not to vote for it. And I want to thank the staff that took those calls to say, no, Jones is not going to vote for this bill. This is not fair to the taxpayers of Eastern North Carolina.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And one thing that we haven't talked about is the president last month rolled out an executive order that would allow amnesty for over 4 million undocumented workers in this country. And this bill does nothing to touch that unconstitutional action at all. I think a lot of those calls yesterday you got were from folks who were upset that this bill did nothing about that.
Well, I appreciate you adding that issue of the president's executive order because it is upset many of us here in Congress and disappointed with our own leadership that we're not addressing that problem. I think it's a constitutional issue, but we don't have time to get into my beliefs on that. But Josh, I want to thank you for being on the show today. I want to thank you for this Christmas present, and I will do my best not to share it with the people of the 3rd District by voting no on this bill.
Amen.
I want to thank our men and women in uniform that serve our nation, their families. I want to thank those of you who are watching this show, and I want to thank God that I have the privilege to serve the 3rd District of North Carolina. And I would like to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And please, God, continue to bless America. Thank you for watching.